Thank you very much. I am very glad to welcome now for a chat Ambroise FAYOLLE, who is a CEO, Vice President of European Investment Bank. Everybody knows EIB and the energetic action of EIB in the energy transition. And Yves PERRIER, Chairman Amundi, a very big asset management company in Europe and in the world, and the Vice Chairman of PERRIER EUROPLACE. We will start with Yves PERRIER. Yves, you have published very recently a report for the French Minister of Finance, Bruno Le Maire, to make recommendations on the way for the Paris Financial Center to accelerate its contribution to carbon neutrality and the energy transition. You are talking from a revolution. Can you tell us what is for you, what is in stake for you, how important is the challenge, including in terms of financing needs?
Thank you. Just a word. I use this term because, in fact, it's the reality. Of course, what we have to do is to get out fossil energy, which has made the development of humanity since the 19th century, beginning by coal, then oil, and then gas. And the first challenge is to get out of this fossil energy. Have in mind that in the world, 80% of the energy presently is fossil. And as we have to increase the consumption of energy, firstly to solve the problem of development, 700 million of people don't have access to electricity, and the other reason is the fact that we will use more and more electricity. So that's, let's say, a Promethean challenge. But it's not only that. We have to change the products. The example of cars is clearly going from traditional engine to electricity engine. To change also the way we manufacture products. We will continue to manufacture steel or cement, but not with the same process of manufacturing. And we have also to change the value chain. So it's a global transformation of the economy that we have to do. And for me, that's my second point. I consider that we need a new, what I call a political economy. To realize this, we need to have a stronger alignment between states, which define public policies, which also influence the economy by tax, but also by companies and by financial institutions. When you manage a company, the main problem, until now was to manage cash. How much cash I have, how I allocate this cash with investment defined by their couple of risk-return. Now we have to manage a budget of CO2. Just the same for banks. For banks, the scarce resource is capital. But now there is another scarce resource, which is the amount of CO2 which is included in the portfolio. So that's a global change, and we have to align between the different institutions, state, and when speaking of states, of course, for Europe, it's the EC, companies and financial institutions. And the example of the problem that we have with energy, not only, which is not only a question of price, it's a question of capacity, is a good example of what not to do or what we have to do now.
Thank you very much. Before going to Ambroise, just a second short question. And now, concretely, what are the next steps in terms of practical action and recommendations for the Paris Financial Center? And by the way, can you give us your views about the European regulation? 3 minutes for these two small questions.
Firstly, we have defined an action plan to enhance the action of the financial institution of Paris. To summarize very shortly, I would say that to build this new economic policy, firstly, we need to have an accounting system. We have to measure the CO2 in each company, because if you want to manage, to orientate, you need to measure. That's the first point. Things will be done with the new extra financial reporting, which will be defined at the end of this year, both at the level of EC, at the level of the IFRS body chaired by Faber. But that's the first point. The second, we have to define the standard of the way we analyze. I will make a comparison. In the 70s, when we introduced the kind of financial market that in which we are living, there were people who defined the way to think to a company on a financial point of view. It was Vernimen, for example, which was well known. Then we defined the way to standardize the way of analyzing with the ratios, EBITDA to debt, leverage, and so on. And progressively, all the analysts in banks, in brokers, equity analysts, credit analysts, had the same way to analyze the company. To make a comparison with the question of the way a company manages the climate issue, I would say that we are in the 70s. We have to define all these standards of analyzing. And the third point is to change the governance, the criteria of governance. That means that it begins by the boards, for the CEOs, but also the member of the executive committee. The way they manage the reduction of CO2 has to be integrated, as well as the way they deliver financial performance. So that's the reason why we are at the beginning of a transformation that will continue. And the last point, at the level of Paris Place, we will create a new body which will enhance the action of Finance for Tomorrow, Institut de la Finance Durable, in order to have at the same table companies, corporates, financial institutions, regulators, and governance. Because if everybody is working in its own, let's say, chapel, it won't work. And the key point today is to work together. And I see, for example, that the word planification is not, something which is no more relevant. It's now relevant because by a certain extent, what we will live is equivalent of a war economy. A war economy, it's an economy where the constraints are becoming objectives.
Thank you very much. End of the beginning, I hope, but not the beginning of the end. And congratulations for this very big initiative with the launching of the IFD. We have been a little bit delayed. I know that you have a busy schedule. And
I apologize, but I have to leave.
Thank you very much, Yves. And now I come to Ambroise. European Investment Bank is a very EIB is very, very active in the energy transition. Same question. So what is at stake for you? What importance of the challenge? What are the needs in terms of financing? And what are you doing concretely?
I was just discussing with, and thank you, Arnaud, with Yves before this session. And he told me that there is a proverb in Asia that says when you wish somebody the worst, you tell this person we are living in a very interesting time, a historic time. And actually, we are working under this extraordinary situation because this is a combination of a challenge that we already had, which is a challenge to get to the net zero. And we know that we need to do that. We owe that to the next generations. And it is combined with a big challenge in terms of energy independence. And that also is a big challenge to meet. And the way we look at it at the European Investment Bank is very close to the way the European Commission has worked on it with its initiative, which is called the Repower EU. We see this as an opportunity to speed up the investments in all forms of energy investment that will lead to more independence and more climate-friendly investments. So the Repower EU is basically 300 billion euros by 2030 in addition to what was needed for the Fit for 55. We intend to contribute to that. We are discussing this with our shareholders currently in order to do more renewable energy, to do more energy efficiency, to do more innovation, to do more adaptation projects, everything that can contribute to have a world where we are not giving up the objective of Europe being in 2050 the first continent to be climate neutral, but at the same time that is quickly much more independent in terms of sources of energy.
Thank you very much. Yeah, very important. And the question of the sovereignty and the way to recover independence in terms of energy supply is completely key for Europe in this context. How concretely, what are your priorities in terms of type of projects? What is the size of the financing that you see in terms of needs, and what is your contribution as an EIB in this environment?
I mean, I would say two things, because we are what we say, we are technology neutral. So we are not going to say one technology is better. We have put in place an energy lending policy. We have a climate bank roadmap that define clearly the targets for the institution. What we think is what works is what will significantly speed up the level of investment in green assets. At the same time, we are a public bank. So there is something very important for us, which is we need to invest only in projects where the projects would not take place without an intervention of a public entity, or not to the same extent. And if I can give you an example, wind farms. I mean, 20 years ago, EIB was very present in terms of investments in onshore wind parks. We don't do that anymore. There is no need for EIB to be active there, or only in rare occasions. 10 years ago, we were very active in offshore wind parks. Less today, except when the projects are really of a very, very big size, and then we can be part of the pool of financiers that are active in the projects. But the technology was complicated 10 years ago. It works quite well today. But today, where we are active is on floating offshore. Because floating offshore is, in terms of technology, it is very complicated. And this is why you need a public institution. So what we are developing today is big projects off the coast of Portugal or in the Mediterranean Sea, the same way that has been taking place before Brexit in Scotland. So this is how I would see we will do whatever we can to support projects that will help reach these two targets, being quickly to energy independence and being as quick as possible to climate neutrality.
Thank you very much. I think that the timing is close, but I would like to ask a last question that we didn't plan in preparing this session, and for 2 minutes. For us here as a Paris Financial Center, one big issue is how to try to improve the dialogue between investors, which are very supportive for going more quickly on the carbon neutrality and the energy transition, and the corporates and the corporate world, because they have to adapt. And like Yves Perrier said, they have to put the concrete instruments into place and make the investments. How do you see this question of the dialogue between the different parties? And my question is also about the taxonomy, the European taxonomy. How do you see the challenge in terms of integrating the concrete business world in the way we are planning the priorities?
Yeah, I mean, it is true that taxonomy is not extremely popular these days for different reasons. I think some people forget that the etymology of the word is Greek, and not that the first 3 letters of the word are related to fiscal policy as well. Some find it very complex, and it is complex. And it is true that, for example, investments that are green, it's clear. Investments that are making harm to reaching the climate target, it's clear. What is in the middle, the sort of amber situation, is more difficult to define, and that's what why we are working on it. But I would say there is something that goes into your question, actually. If you want investors to invest in green assets, you need that they have no doubt that what they are going to invest is indeed green assets. And that's what is the purpose of taxonomy. This is exactly that. It's making sure that when you invest in an asset and you say it has a significant contribution to being green, this is the case. And the second thing is, it also should allow to combine all the different taxonomies. We are not the only one in Europe to do taxonomies. There is one in China. And actually, what is important also to try to encompass all the different taxonomies to make sure that the goals are consistent everywhere, because after all, climate challenge is a global one, and we are not going to be able ourselves to deal with that only with ourselves. So this is the combination of making sure that we invest really in assets that there is no doubt for investors they are green, and at the same time that we can also try to be as global as possible.
We are implementing the Sustainable Finance Institute with Yves Perrier, with Finance for Tomorrow, the branch of Paris EUROPLACE, which is dedicated to sustainable finance, to organize a better dialogue between public authorities, corporate world, and investors. And on the question of how to determine a good and sustainable infrastructure, as the Minister has announced this morning, we are very proud to welcome the implementation of Fast Infra, which is an international initiative with the objective to labellize the sustainable infrastructure. And I welcome my friend Olivier Sichel from the Caisse des Dépôts, who will be very interested by this subject. So we are working on these different issues. Thank you very much for your participation, and welcome to the next session.